What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Self-Made Web Designer Podcast. So good to have you with me again this week. You know, when you're first getting started, kind of dipping your toes in the water, looking at what it would take to break into the UX design career field, you're met with a lot of options. You know, there's the self-taught path. There's the typical university, the traditional route. And then there are what's called bootcamps. And bootcamps are becoming more and more popular as the UX design field is becoming a more popular field to get into. The problem is these bootcamps, they promise a lot of things and they ask for a lot of money. And that leaves most of us wondering, is this worth it? That is exactly the topic that we discuss this week with Miss Jessica Gaddis. And Jessica is a self-taught UX designer, and going that route actually turned out really well for her. She works at Twitter and has previously worked at Netflix as a UX designer. So she is absolutely crushing it. And she's really passionate about making UX design education more accessible to more people. You're not going to want to miss out on what she has to say. It's going to be fantastic. Are you ready? Buckle up. Here we go. Well, hey, Jessica, thank you so much for being on the Self-Made Web Designer Podcast.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
So tell us a little bit about your journey, about your background, where you've come from, and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Yeah, so I actually went to school for journalism. I thought that I was going to be a broadcast journalist. I thought I wanted to be on TV. And then my freshman year of college, I got an internship at a local news station in Detroit. I did one package on TV and realized that I hated being in front of the camera, and broadcast was probably not the best thing for me. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do at that time, but I knew that I still wanted to be around storytelling in some kind of way. So I actually graduated with a degree in journalism, but started my career in public relations in Chicago, and then eventually moved to California because I wanted to work with technology companies. So I started working at a PR agency out in San Francisco. Quickly learned that although I liked being around technology companies, trying to kind of tell the story of a product that was already existing, for better or for worse, really didn't interest me as much. I really wanted to kind of touch the work and really help make kind of tangible changes to the actual products. So PR was a little bit too far down the line in terms of product development, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. So I kind of stayed in the technology space and the communication space. And then I don't know if I found UX or if UX found me, but at some point I stumbled across this term user experience, had no idea what it was. You don't really see the letters U and X together very often. So I was intrigued by it. Started learning a little bit. I had a project at my agency that I was working at the time. It helped me kind of apply some of the things I was learning with UX very quickly. And then after about 3 months, I realized that I liked doing that project with UX a lot more than my day job. I definitely didn't intend to switch careers. It was more so like, well, if I like it, maybe I can do it on the side. It's kind of fun. It gives me some creative, inspiration. But then I realized that I really wanted to do it way more than my day job. So spent about 8 months, I guess, teaching myself. And I say that in quotation marks because the internet definitely taught me all that I know. And then started applying. I had a portfolio ready to go. Got my first design job at Netflix as a contractor. Supposed to stay for 3 months. Ended up staying for 2.5 years. And I guess the rest is history. Now I'm a product designer at Twitter, based in Dallas, Texas, and I love what I do every day. So I'm super excited to talk to you about it.
Man, that's awesome, and a really inspiring story. And your background is a little unique, coming from journalism to PR and then going into UX design. So talk a little bit about that. How do you feel like your journey was beneficial to your ultimate career as a UX product designer, and maybe some drawbacks from going that way as well?
I definitely think that journalism and public relations definitely have some parallels within the design industry, which is kind of cool in terms of storytelling, user research and interviewing. Those types of things were easy for me to translate. Something that I tell all of the women that I kind of coach and mentor is to find the parallels from the job that you are leaving to the career that you're transitioning to. And it makes it a lot easier to lean into those skills because you've already been doing it in your previous job. I think for me, I think it was kind of an easy transition, but it also kind of made it very apparent the things that I was not good at. So visual design for me has always been kind of like my Achilles heel. So because I was so good at like the interviewing and the storytelling, it definitely shone a little bit of a light on the visual design, issues that I had early on. So I think overall it definitely helped my transition. I appreciate the perspective that my background in communications has given me with design. And even a lot of the soft skills around just like holding a room, holding people's attention, having a conversation, presenting, like all of those things kind of come into play. And I thank my journalism background for all of that kind of stuff.
And you mentioned, the different aspects of what a UX or product designer has to focus on. And I think a lot of people, when they're first looking at becoming a UX designer, feel like they've got to be an artistic, an illustrator. They've got to know tons about Adobe Photoshop or something like that. But, in our world, that's just not the case. And we know that because we're in it. So maybe talk a little bit about that and how you found your way through that.
When people hear the word design, obviously graphic design is an easy way to not an easy way to get into user experience, but it helps people kind of apply the things that they did in their artistic backgrounds. For me, business strategy and kind of product development were the things that interested me the most. And when I started out, I really wanted to lean into the things that were interesting to me so that I could get those skills together. I think when you're starting out, you don't want to specialize so early and you want to be a generalist, of course. But I think people kind of get the wrong idea about what you do as a designer. The good thing about user experience is you can kind of create your lane based on what you're interested in and what you want to spend your time doing. I spend so much of my time studying and reading and trying to learn new, topics because I work in enterprise design. So it's not all just screens and pixels and fancy software. A lot of it really is just understanding the problem space that you're in. So for me, that's the easiest way for me to kind of instruct people or help people is to tell them to become a domain expert in whatever industry you're getting into. So if you're working for, a financial services company, I'm sure you'll be designing some kind of software, but how much do you actually know about the financial services industry? And I think that kind of helps give people a better understanding about kind of what their day-to-day is going to look like, because you're going to have lots of terms and acronyms and words you don't understand. So it's not just the act of designing. A lot of what design is trying to understand your users. And a lot of that has to do with the actual industry that they exist within. So that's something that I've definitely found has been very helpful for me leveling up as a designer. Is the more I increase my domain expertise, the better I get at my job because I'm asking different questions. So that's been really helpful for me. And that's something I try to tell everyone who asks me about, how do I get to the next level? It's like, sure, you can learn, the fancy prototyping software if you want to, but like what industry are you in and how much do you know about it? And how can you bring those skills into your product development and design, software days?
So it's not just about making things pretty. It's much more in depth than that.
I make so many ugly things. Let me tell you, like everything is definitely not pretty. Aesthetics definitely have a big part, but I think the actual function comes first and the form comes after. You don't want to put out necessarily anything that's like terrible because it'll make it hard for your users to use it. But I think a big part of it is not just leading with aesthetics because you kind of get caught up in the color and how big it is or how small it is and all these other things. If you don't actually understand the problem that you're solving, no matter how you try to paint it, it's actually not going to be helpful for your users. So really spending time in that problem space definitely makes a difference.
And I'm sure a ton of people listening just had a big sigh of relief on their dreams to become UX designers, because I think there's just that mind block with the word designer in it. You think you've got to be this ultra creative, like always has paint on their face from some art project that they're doing or something. And it's just not the case.
When I tell people that I can't draw, like I mean that I'm not doing illustrations every day. I don't make icons. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. Granted, screens are a bunch of rectangles and boxes and lines and things, but it really is you're creating your own lane. So if you're interested in visual design, by all means, go for it. But if you're kind of like hesitant about what you're going to be able to do in that space, there are so many other ways that you can be involved and still be a really great designer, especially with so many companies using design systems these days. Now, that doesn't mean that you get away from visual design. You still have to know the fundamentals. You still need to know how to look at something and know if it looks good or not. But you don't have to necessarily over-index on kind of the graphic design side of things because there's so much else that comes with it.
So let's talk about education a little bit, because I know this is something that you're passionate about and something that you've kind of experienced on, in your own journey with, I think I read something that said, you gave yourself $1,000 for an 8-month period of learning how to become a UX designer. So talk about your journey in that, because there are so many courses and so many paths. It's become a real popular career path. And there's a lot of companies who are benefiting from that with their $20,000 UX design programs. So share your thoughts on all of that.
I have so many opinions about design education and how accessible it is and how exclusive it feels. For me, one thing I will say, I didn't go to a boot camp necessarily. That's why 8 months was kind of my trajectory to get into design. There's nothing necessarily wrong with boot camp, so I don't want that to be the story here. It's really about finding one that works for you and really assessing the situation that you're in. I wouldn't recommend anybody take a loan out of $15,000 for anything, especially if you're not even sure if you really want to do it. But if you have the means to do so, go for it. For me, I want design education to be more accessible, especially for people that look like me and who want to be in design. Because to me, if you want to be a designer, anyone can be a designer. There should be, this barrier to entry is so high that people get, kind of overwhelmed by thinking about how they're actually going to make it. They don't even get to really feel how great it is to be in design because they're so worried about that first step. Then there's the portfolio, and then there's the interview, and there's the design challenge. There's all these things that make it seem like it's not accessible to you. Now, I have friends who have gone to boot camps. I've had friends who have self-taught, friends that just kind of found their way, or they transitioned from another role. Again, you can make your own lane, but for me, my goal is to encourage people to really look at their own situation, look at what their goals are. And before you jump to a boot camp, because in theory, the boot camp might be the easy choice because it's like the curriculum's already laid out for you. You already know what the end result's going to be. But what I've heard from a lot of people that have gone to boot camps is that you'll end up, putting in 200% to really get that return on investment. And to me, that's not a problem. But if you're spending $15,000 and working yourself to death, to me, there's a little bit of an imbalance there. I feel like a lot of these boot camps aren't very upfront, especially with the career portion of trying to find a job. I've seen so many accounts of people who have spent all this money going to boot camps and then, didn't find a job for 6 to 9 months after the fact. And that to me means that if you're going to spend 6 to 9 months trying to find a job afterwards, why not spend 6 months trying to teach yourself initially and see what you can get around? And you'll spend a lot less money, I promise you. Now, if you're a person who needs that really rigid structure, by all means, if you know the way that you learn, go for it. But I think my goal in kind of talking about design education and trying to make it more accessible is to let people know that there are other ways to get into design. And it doesn't have to be this, step 1, go to a boot camp. Step 2, figure out how to pay back $15,000 because you had to take out a loan, for this program. So overall, I'm not against boot camps by any means, but I don't think that if you can't afford it, you feel like you can't be a designer now. There are other ways to get into the industry and to teach yourself. And there's so many resources out there. So there are other ways. But if you want to go boot camp, go boot camp. I will, cheer for you all the way. But if you can't afford it, which again, I couldn't afford it. So there are definitely other ways to become a designer.
And you mentioned the promises of careers that boot camps offer. In your experience with your friends that have taken them, have they had the success that is kind of guaranteed along with the boot camp, or has it been a different experience altogether?
So I have a friend who went to a boot camp. I won't name it, but she actually had a really good experience. A lot of what she did definitely was like putting in the additional effort, the late nights, all the things, same things you would do in college, going to office hours and all that kind of stuff. I think her specific boot camp was structured a lot better. The classes were smaller, the one-on-one interaction with the teachers was just more pronounced. And it wasn't just fundamentals. So for me, I think that a lot of times, to me, fundamentals don't cost $15,000 because I can learn this technically anywhere. I want the extra edge. And to me, her program definitely had the extra edge because it wasn't just design. It was also business strategy. It was also product development. There were so many other elements that the people that came out of that program were definitely more well-rounded as opposed to coming out of the program and only knowing the fundamentals of UX. You can learn that by yourself, in my opinion. You want to go for a program that has that extra edge and also being mindful of the person you're going to be learning from. So who is your instructor? Can you talk to them beforehand? Can Do they tell you kind of how their teaching style is? Sometimes people go after the course, and I think it's really the entire experience, including your instructor. I had another friend who said that her peers were always going so much harder at things, so it made her go harder. So again, the people that you're learning with also make an impact, and you may not know that up front, but there are so many more elements than, okay, this is the class that I want to take, because it's more than the class, it's more than the syllabus. And I think if people take the extra minute to really dive deeper and understand if this is going to be a place where they can be successful, they'll get a better outcome in the end.
I've done a lot of research on boot camps. I never went to one specifically, but have had a lot of people from the podcast and the blog ask me about them. And the thing that I hear over and over again is that it's just as much about the effort that you put in as it is about the course that you take or the organization that you choose to get the education from. So I read somebody who said, had they not done a lot of networking outside of office hours or outside of their coursework, they would not have landed a job. And I think that's kind of missing in that space. It's not just, you don't just need to learn how to become a designer. You need to learn how to build relationships with people over the internet. You need to learn how to communicate well. You need to learn how to present yourself well. All those things that you mentioned at the very beginning.
And I think even thinking of now with like COVID and the pandemic, for me, when I was learning UX, a big part of my personal curriculum was going to design events in San Francisco and being in the space. I had no idea what they were talking about. They were saying all these terms that I had not learned yet, but just being around the people that were doing the talking and doing the working and learning that language was really important. So I feel like now with, a lot of in-person events not really happening as much as they used to, that could either be really, really great for you trying to learn, or it could be kind of a negative. So again, in addition to just being in this classroom in your boot camp, trying to find other spaces and communities that you can engage with, because you're going to need all of this. It can't just be what they're teaching you in the classroom, because I promise you it won't be everything. And the other thing I will say about boot camps, I think a lot of them, you do get the project at the end. Sometimes it's a group project. It goes into your portfolio. Like there are all these things that you come out with that are tangible. But for me, when I was learning and teaching myself, with the internet, I needed to apply what I was learning very quickly. So if I learned about card sorting, I needed to go and card sort immediately to retain that information. And I think if people really took the time to learn a concept deeply and apply it immediately, it might be easier for them to retain what they're learning. The problem with boot camps is that you're learning so much at one time, and they could be moving very fast that you don't even get a chance to really apply it. So by the end of it, you're like, I know all of these words, but I have no clue when I am approached with a problem which things I'm supposed to do, because you didn't really get a chance to really dive deep into it. So being on your own schedule and on your own pace, and if you spend more time on card sorting than you do on user flows, that's up to you, as opposed to someone else telling you like, all right, we're moving to the next lesson. Really getting able to dive deep and then actually applying what you're learning at the same time. That's what I found really helpful.
You mentioned that there's a big barrier to entry when it comes to education. And I'd love for you to just chat about some solutions for that, about some things that the tech industry can do to kind of lower that barrier.
I thought a lot about this. A part of me, I think that the only way that people get into the industry, for me, the portfolio process, I have issues with it. Because I think that, again, that's another very high barrier to expect that someone who is just starting out has had the chance to work on a cross-functional team on a project that has shipped, that was mobile, that had all these users. That initial step of getting into design, to me, that it's too difficult, and it takes so much effort mentally just to wrap your head around, like, wait, I have to have a portfolio of 2 to 3 projects of things that I have designed or built or what have you. I think more companies need to do apprenticeship programs where they bring people in based on their potential, based on an essay that they wrote, the same thing that you would do, for an internship. I think having to show your work initially kind of dissuades people from actually trying. And it's not that the people that try are better. It's that the people that try either have more access, have more resources, or have someone telling them, do it this way or do it that way. I think we lean too much on grit and this idea that people have to struggle so hard if they're going to be worth it, if they have value, they've went through all of these things, when I don't think that it needs to be that way. I think if more companies were really investing in teaching people how to be good designers, whether that's UX or UI or product or service or whatever the term is these days, they would get so much more return on investment. But then you have all these people that are going to these boot camps and they're coming coming to your doorstep because they just paid all this money and they're expecting you to give them an opportunity, and you're saying no because it was a project with a partner, or no because you didn't work with a real client. There are all these things where it's like, I just did all of this work to get here, and now I still haven't done enough. And to me, the responsibility should not all be on the person trying to be a designer, because if you're a company and you have the privilege of being able to tap into all of this talent, you should go for it and actually invest in building these systems that bring people in and actually give them an opportunity, whether it's 3 months or 6 months or whatever. But I think a lot of companies don't know how to teach people to be designers. And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, because it's definitely an investment. But you've got all these designers out in the world who are trying to find their place, and companies are like, no, we can't take you. It's because they can't teach you. And that to me is a problem that should be on the company's side and not on the designer's side. Like, I'm coming to you with something, so, give me a chance. But I don't see a lot of companies that do that. The entry-level job descriptions that say you need 5 years of experience are asinine to me. So I hope that the tech industry really leans into this and tries to give people a chance. And if someone doesn't work out, so what? Because you can hire someone that has 10 years of experience and they don't work out either. So there's definitely opportunity there. I don't know how many companies are really going to take it seriously, but I'm hoping that more of them try to invest in, internship programs, apprenticeship programs, new graduate programs, whatever it might be, because they'll actually learn how to be better design organizations. When you start teaching people, you learn more as well. So
right, because at the end of the day, a good UX designer is somebody who's able to see from a lot of different angles and perspectives. And there's just unfortunately not that in the tech space. And it really sucks. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, and think that, the UX design world is so new to the scene to begin with. Like, we are coming up with terms and then canceling the terms or redefining the terms. And so we don't even know what we're ourselves doing altogether right now.
My title has changed like 3 times across my career of like 5 years. Like, I've had a different title every single time. It makes no sense to me.
Right. So it would make sense that if the industry itself is teaching ourselves about who we are, we should be willing to teach other people so that we can come along with them.
You would think so. And I don't understand. I mean, I know that design definitely is considered in most industry or in most markets a high paying job, which I understand. If you want to pay someone, 6 figures, sure, you want them to come in the door and having, all their tools ready to go. But if someone's coming in with less than that, then you just pay them less than 6 figures. It doesn't have to start at this super high paying job if someone's coming in with no experience. Like, you pay people based on their experience and their potential for growth. So even if you have to drop the salaries down to meet an intern at their level, that should be fine. So I don't think the argument that, designers make so much money and technology, you make so much money, pay people what they are worth, what their market, cap is, but don't make that a reason why we don't want to bring someone young in because we're going to be paying them all this money and they don't know what they're doing. Like, that just doesn't make sense to me.
I want to take a second and tell you about a free course that I have available at selfmadewebdesigner.com. Over 1,000 people have been through this course, and I am talking about the Web Designer Starter Kit course. I map out in 4 videos that you get through email all the steps that I took to get to where I am as a web designer. And I went from knowing absolutely nothing. I was clueless to, in 2 years, doubling my income with a freelance web design side hustle. I made this because I know you can be successful doing the same thing. And the Web Designer Starter Kit course is the first step for you on your journey to being a successful, thriving freelance web designer or having a full-time career. So I can't wait for you to check it out. Go to selfmadewebdesigner.com and sign up today. So you've worked for some pretty big name companies, and in a lot of ways, these are companies that UX designers, when they're first getting started, would say, this is the mecca. This is the goal of my career. So talk a little bit about that. What has your experience been like working for this kind of organizations? Is it all it's cracked up to be? Is it for everybody?
I will definitely say that I am blessed to have had the opportunities that I've had. I think starting out, especially as a designer, having a big name attached to your career definitely gives you a little bit more credibility than you would have if you were kind of working at a smaller place. So I don't take that lightly by any means. I know that I've gotten in through a lot of doors because, I had Netflix or Twitter attached to me. But I think that going to these big companies, there are a lot of things that you should consider besides the actual brand of the company. When I was at Netflix, I kind of worked on this. I called it a small startup within Netflix. It was originally called Enterprise Platforms and then turned into the studio technology team. It was kind of, a small little team that worked on entertainment software for Netflix studios down in LA. So I didn't work on the Netflix.com product. And that's where my love for enterprise design kind of came from. That experience was very different for me because I started, reporting to an engineering manager. I wasn't really on a cohesive design team. And I definitely learned a lot of bad habits at that time because, that team it operated like a startup. We just kind of went really fast and tried things out. And I didn't exactly know what I was doing because I was very, very new. This was my first design job. But the experience was really, really great for me. And I think now that I'm at Twitter, I'm on a team that is definitely very, very mature, a really, really great structure in terms of the organization. But for me, I go to work for leaders that I trust. And when I was at Netflix, I worked for a man named Sabri Tosin, who hired me. He's a Black man. And then now at Twitter, I work for a man named Dantley Davis, also a Black man. And for me, that was a really big part of my experience, was going someplace where I felt like I would have a leader who understood me as opposed to me having to explain myself. And I think when anyone's looking at any organization, big or small, look at the people that are already there and figure out, is this place going to be able to support me in my career growth? I think having the opportunity to work at these big names has been amazing. And I think it's definitely helped me to hone in on what I want to do. So whenever I go next, I can use the experience that I've gotten at these other organizations. But every organization should, in theory, help your career level up. So if you're going to a new company, look for the things that you didn't have at your last company that you need to get yourself more well-rounded. Like, I've never worked with a strategy and operations team in my design career. And we have an amazing one at Twitter that really does handle the strategy and operations of our design team. And it's amazing to not have to worry about how to set up a, design sprint or how to, get people for my research studies. So I want to experience different types of teams throughout my career. And I think that these big companies usually have a really good handle on that, but you never know. It depends on where you go. It can't just be the big name, though. It has to be something more. It has to be something deeper. And you need to ask those questions early on. Otherwise, you'll get in a situation where you've got a big name and you are miserable. So
somebody who's thinking about trying to eventually be at a place like Netflix or Google or whatever, what do you think the best strategy for them in leveling up their career, like you said, would be?
Well, I think in general, whether you're going to a Netflix or a Google, for me, it's always finding your specific story and your specific narrative and using that to separate yourself from other designers. So I love talking to designers who have transitioned from completely different careers, whether you were a financial advisor or a lawyer or whatever it is, because again, that perspective that you bring is going to be so different than anyone else who would ever be a designer. So if you're a lawyer turned designer, just imagine how much more strategic thinking you're going to bring to the table, how much more, just the soft skills, the communication, being able to really look at a problem and figure out a strategy to solve it. There are so many things that you could bring to the table. So I think for me, no matter where you're trying to go, it really is finding your narrative and what makes you unique and why that is going to be a strength for you. So I used to be a waitress. I've talked about this in my interviews because it has helped me being able to talk to people and make people feel comfortable. And I don't know if I thought when I was a waitress I was going to eventually work at Twitter, but I think that experience definitely helped me, just in my interviews and really being able to talk about my story. So really understanding what your story is and why it makes you different. No one really wants, a carbon copy of the last designer, because there's something different about you and your perspective on the world that these companies need to hear, and they need to know that there are so many different types of designers. There is not just one or two or three. There's as many types as there are designers. Everyone is different. Everyone brings something new. And you don't have to be great at every single part of design to be a successful designer. For me, you just need to have the willingness to learn and being able to apply what you're learning to the work that you're doing, and then being able to refine and keep moving and, really, really helping yourself kind of become the best designer you can be. But overall, it's whatever you're doing, whether you are a waitress or a bartender, or if you're a lawyer or whoever you are, there's going to be some parallel between what you're doing now and what you want to be doing as a designer. So leaning into that and using that as a strength and using that to find your unique story, I think that's kind of the best thing that you can do.
You mentioned talking about your past experiences in your interview process. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the interview processes that you have been through to kind of shed some light for people who have never even gotten an interview and are wondering what it's going to be like. What did that look like for you?
Interviews are crazy, not because they are necessarily hard, but part of the interview is just the mental game of having yourself feel prepared and feel confident. I think you can prepare as much as you want to, but like when you walk in that room, like you have to be ready for game time. I would say, people are very forgiving. I've stumbled over words in interviews. I've messed up a couple of times. It happens to everyone. But to me, really in an interview, it's, do you know what you're talking about? Like for me, when I present a portfolio, for example, I'm not talking about every single thing that I did. I'm highlighting the themes. I'm talking about, my challenges where I had to pivot. And then when someone asks me a question about something that I left out, I need to be able to have an answer. So even though you're going to practice your presentation, you need to also be able to anticipate what questions your interview board is going to ask you so that you can also answer those as well. So a lot of that comes from knowing your projects back and forth, being well versed in the things that you did and the reasons why you made certain decisions. So a lot of interviewing really is communicating. A lot of one-on-ones. For me, it's really when I'm talking to someone and I'm interviewing with them and I want this job and we're having a one-on-one, I want to learn about what they do and what makes them tick and what their motivations are. I want to show that I care about them as a person because I'm probably going to be working with them. So a lot of it really is trying to make that human-to-human connection. And then the other side is really being confident in your story and confident in the work that you've done. And even if the work is not that great, because I'm telling you right now, my first portfolio was not that great. It was rough at best, but I was confident in it. I could talk about the reasons why I made certain decisions. Yes, my visuals were not that great, but my strategy was sound. So even if there are places that you're like, this isn't my best work, there's something there that you can use to advance, that story. So for me, I showed that I could learn quickly and apply it quickly, even if the work wasn't at where it could be, the next time I try it. So it's leaning into your strengths, but really leaning into your weaknesses and talking about the reasons why, you may not be there yet, but you're going to get there.
I love that, talking about your weaknesses, because most of the time, and I have friends who do a lot of hiring for tech companies who say they hate it when people say, my biggest weakness is that I care too much or I work too hard or whatever. So how did you go about talking about the mistakes and maybe the pivots that you had to make and the lessons that you learned in the interview process?
Yeah, so for me, even in my interview with Twitter last year, I did a project I worked at an agency in Dallas, a mobile development agency named Bottle Rocket, and I was on a project with a pretty big client in the hospitality industry and did some work for them, obviously, over the course of my time at that agency. And when you're designing something, it starts out ugly for a really long time. And it's ugly for a while. And it doesn't really get nice and pretty until you kind of really have figured out the problem. I think when you go to a new place, the first thing that you design at your new company is probably not going to be that great because you're still trying to figure out just the organizational processes. And one of the first things that I designed actually ended up as a case study in my Twitter interview. And I called it out hey, I designed it this way, but next time I would definitely do this. So it wasn't like I was shying away from it. I knew they would probably ask questions about why I made that design decision. So again, anticipating what they're going to ask me. But I called it out. I was like, hey, I'm presenting this thing to you, but next time I do something like this, I would definitely not do it this way. And here are the reasons why. I don't want it to be a secret that something that I've done may have been done better, because I know that every time I do a project, I'm going to look back and say, okay, what could I have done differently? And sure, I may not have a chance to redesign it, but that doesn't mean that it's not a conversation to be had, because this project changed me as a designer in some way. So I don't shy away from it. And I hope that people get more comfortable talking about the mistakes that they make in processes, whether that's interpersonal mistakes or actually just design mistakes, because if you're a perfect designer, I have questions. So I have follow-up questions. So for me, it's I know that this may not have been the best decision to make for this project. However, because of this project, I learned that thing. So for the next project, I know don't make that mistake again. And to me, that is so much more rewarding than, oh, I did it perfectly. Everyone loved it. And the numbers were off the charts, the KPIs and all the things. Like, if you didn't learn something that's going to challenge you as a designer and make you a better designer, then it's like, well, why did you do the project in the first place? So,
and I think a lot of, especially in creative fields, a lot of people struggle with separating the thing that they do from their actual own value as a person. And so when we present something and it gets rejected or it gets critiqued, like, we take that personally. How do you keep that from happening in your own work?
It's definitely difficult, especially coming from a journalism background where when you like turn in a paper, your editor is like, red mark, red mark, red mark. Like, it definitely feels like someone is like, I don't know, like punching your cat, or I don't know what it is, but someone's like just being mean to you. I think for me, it's really, I need to be self-aware enough to know that there may be certain things that are not as good as they could be. So when someone calls that out, it's not like it's the first time I'm hearing it. Now, granted, you're definitely going to have blind spots, but you have to be open to people being able to pour into you and make you better. And if you think you're going to get better by yourself, then you may be in the wrong industry. So I think knowing that there's always an opportunity for you to improve, and you're not always going to be the person that calls it out. So you may have patterns that you don't even notice. So as long as you are always open to receiving that feedback, at all times from whoever, whether they are above you, beside you, below you, whatever, because everyone can teach you something about yourself if you give them the opportunity to do so. Trying not to be defensive, obviously, like, unless they're like just super mean and super rude, but even then there's probably something there that you can take from it, even if you kind of take away the tone. So trying not to really take things personally, especially if you know, like, okay, there are some things I could have done better. So if someone calls it out, like, I know, but there also you're going to have blind spots, and you're going to be surprised sometimes when someone says, you did this in a weird way or whatever the thing might be. But always being open to having your mind changed is really something that I try to use that all the time. So I have a strong opinion about something. I think something is right. I have all the facts and figures, but I'm still going to leave a little bit of room for someone to change my mind, because there are things that I don't know. And it's okay to change your opinion or change your process when you learn something new. And no matter who's bringing you that something new that you learned, you should still take it as a blessing and a gift, because it's going to help you get better.
So talk a little bit about the future of design. Where do you think things are headed, or what kind of changes can we be anticipating?
I will say I don't have a smart home by any means, but I do use a lot of voice hardware and software. And even when I'm cooking, I'm talking to my Google Home, asking, how many quarts are in a pint or whatever the thing might be. I think that we have in the past gotten really used to convenience being the thing that kind of hooks people in technology, like something being so convenient, like, oh, of course I'm going to get that app because it makes my life so much easier. I think that we're going to start seeing a lot more people being more vocal about what they actually need from technology. I think we have been a lot of companies build a lot of things, and they think that they're solving all of these problems. And for me, and I've talked about this previously, is there are people on the ground in communities doing so much great work, but they don't have the resources that a technology company has. And for me, that's kind of crappy, because the people that know the problem in and out are not being given the resources or the space or being amplified in a way that would actually help them do that work better. So although I love, my voice controlled things, and I love, the convenience of technology, I'm hoping that in the future, more companies are looking for people that are on the ground solving these problems and giving them the floor, give them the mic, and let them kind of talk about it, while the tech companies in the background just kind of pouring in resources, because the people that know the problem should be at the table to talk about it, as opposed to a tech company that hires a consultant that builds this team out, and everyone on the team literally has no empathy. They don't know anything about the people in the community that they're building for. So I hope to see a lot more community-driven technology. And I don't mean for just big problems. It could be for small problems as well, but there are so many people doing so much good work who don't have the resources or, the know-how that some technology companies have. So I'm hoping that technology loses a bit of its ego, passes the mic to the people that are doing the work, and really kind of comes together and gives them the resource, as opposed to kind of co-opting the problem to fix it themselves.
What about yourself? What kind of projects are coming down the pike for you that you're excited about, or any kind of changes in your own career?
I I've always done like office hours with designers who reach out on, Twitter or LinkedIn or by email, and they have questions about my journey or how I got into design and how I can help them. So I've always been doing that. This year recently, within the last month or so, I actually opened up office hours pretty much to any Black woman who is interested or in design. And I thought it was going to be, 20, maybe 30 people reach out to set up a session. And I think I have over 150 sessions booked between now and Labor Day. So that's kind of crazy. I'm excited about it, but for me, it's really trying to figure out how to create space for Black women who are interested in design or who are early in their careers in design to talk about being designers. I think so often Black and brown people get brought to the conversation to talk about diversity, which is great, but we don't get to talk about our skills because we're actually good designers, and we should be given the space to talk about prototyping software and chatbots and conversational UIs and all of those things, but we never really get that space to do it. So for me, these office hours have been a way to kind of indirectly understand the problem within that specific community. And I've had maybe 15 sessions so far in the past 2 weeks, and every single time I'm amazed by how much work we are doing as Black women to become better designers, but how little we see other people that look like us. So I've got a lot of sessions. I think my sessions are booked out for my actual intro sessions, but I'm also going to be doing some peer mentorship sessions. Peer mentorship is something that I'm very, very thankful for, and I'm very, very into. And if anyone ever asks me about, the biggest impact that I've had on my career, it won't be like working at Netflix or working at Twitter. It'll literally be finding people that are in my community who are alongside me, who have helped me become a better designer. So mentorship, traditionally, obviously we think of the person that's like the VP of the company who's 20 years ahead of your career, and they're going to mentor you and help you kind of plan your career out. I think there's space for that. But for me, I found that having a peer who's alongside me experiencing the same thing that I'm experiencing has actually been way more impactful, because when you're a designer, you're starting out, you're new, you feel very self-conscious about what you know and what you don't know. Imposter syndrome is something we talk about all the time. So when you have someone next to you who's experiencing the same thing and you're like, hey, am I crazy? Like, I'm going through this thing and I'm not really sure what to do about it. And they're like, oh, no, you're not crazy. Last week I went through the same thing. Here's what you should do. That to me is so impactful, and it helps you kind of just forget about all of the things that could go wrong and really be able to focus on design, because you're not wondering like, okay, am I like dumb? Do they think that I'm stupid? Am I, not that good of a designer? Should I even be here? How did they even hire me? Like all these things that come with imposter syndrome. Peer mentorship has definitely helped me kind of calm those thoughts down a little bit, because I've got people I can look to say, okay, this is not a unique problem. I can use my resources that are, next to me to really try to figure out how to move forward. So within my kind of Black women designing community, I'm going to be doing some peer mentorship sessions, facilitating some workshops with like 4 or 5 women who are at a very niche point in their journey. I want them to be able to share their struggles, their experiences, their resources with each other, to really understand that even though you may not see a lot of Black women working with you, there are so many people who look like you who are doing this work, and you can learn from them, even if they just started in design, a month ago. So I'm very passionate about making just design education in general more accessible, but also just creating spaces for Black women to talk about being designers and share skills and just like level up their careers. So that's what I'm working on now. I got a lot of sessions, a lot of one-on-ones, and I'm hoping that it is fruitful and that I'm helping people out. But yeah, that's what I've got going on right now.
That sounds awesome. Jessica, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing your experience and insight. If somebody wants to connect with you, how would they go about doing that?
I talk on Twitter every single day, as you can probably imagine, being an employee and also having been on Twitter for 10 years. So my Twitter account is Maria Gaddis, so MariaGaddis. That is the best way to get in touch with me. My emails are going crazy. My LinkedIn is wild, but Twitter is always a place where I am. So if you want to find me, definitely come to Twitter.
Awesome. Thanks again. Hope to have you on the show sometime in the future to hear about everything that's going on. And
I would love to update you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much again. Wow, Jessica has some awesome knowledge that she just dropped on us about all things UX design. I hope that you were encouraged by it. I hope if you're listening and you've thought, surely I can't pay for these UX design boot camps, and so there's no chance that I'm able to get into a UX design career. I hope that this shows you that you absolutely can do it without needing to spend tens of thousands of dollars figuring it out. And I want to encourage you to reach out to Jessica and connect with her on Twitter. She's got a lot of great insight, and she's also got a lot of awesome tweets that are happening. I mean, she works for Twitter. It's basically her job to put great tweets out there. So go find her, connect with her, and encourage other people to listen to this episode who might be wondering, how do I break into the UX design field? Hey, we've got another episode coming up next week. But before that, have you subscribed? Have you left a rating? I want to encourage you to do that, because by doing that, it helps other people find this podcast and to hear awesome guests like Jessica and help them make the connection between where they are and where they want to end up being in their career as a web designer, as a UX designer, as a front-end developer. Hey, I know if you do it, it's going to help somebody else out. And who hates helping people? Not me. I love it. So take a second and do that. Next week, we've got another awesome guest. He's somebody who has been a mentor to me. He just didn't know it. He mentored me from afar, and his name is Brad Hussey, and I'm excited for you to hear Brad. He's got a lot of thoughts on what it means to market yourself ethically as a freelance web designer. You're not going to want to miss it. 12 a.m. next Tuesday. We will see you there.